The story takes place in a futuristic world. In the year 2033, America is a society where technology has advanced significantly. However, the protagonist, Gray, is a traditional car mechanic who prefers to do everything manually, as he doesn't trust artificial intelligence. Despite his old-fashioned ways, he has a beautiful wife who works in the AI field. One day, Gray tells his wife that he needs to return a car his friend brought in for repairs. He asks her to accompany him by driving the self-driving car, as it's the only way for him to make it back in time after returning the vehicle. His wife happily agrees. At this moment, Gray has no idea that this decision will change his wife's, and even humanity's fate forever. The scene shifts, and as soon as Gray meets his friend, his wife is immediately shocked. She never expected his friend to be Alan, the CEO of the largest tech company. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Alan reveals the latest invention he has been working on, an advanced AI chip, which looks like a small, bug-like device. Alan called the device Smart Brain, claiming it could control anything in the world. However, to Gray, it looked like nothing more than a useless cockroach. Little did Gray know that cockroach would completely alter his life. On their way home, Gray was chatting with his wife when suddenly the self-driving car malfunctioned. It veered off course, taking them into a slum filled with violent criminals. The vehicle lost control and crashed. They were soon surrounded by a group of masked assailants. To make matters worse, one of the attackers ruthlessly shot and killed Gray's wife without hesitation. Gray, screaming in agony, was powerless to do anything. Before he could even grieve, another assailant injected something into his spine. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. Gray, though fortunate enough to survive, had lost both his beloved wife and his ability to walk. The severe injury left him paralyzed for life. Now, Gray had to depend on the very thing he once despised, artificial intelligence, for even the most basic tasks. His mother tried to comfort him, suggesting he could find a job to support both of them. But what his mother didn't know was that the only thing keeping Gray alive, after this double tragedy, was his burning desire to see the people responsible for his wife's death brought to justice. However, the detective in charge of the case told Gray that the criminals were extremely cunning. They had evaded police drones and facial recognition before their attack, which meant there was no way to identify the killers through surveillance footage. Upon hearing this, Gray was on the verge of despair. He had no idea how he could avenge his wife. Just when he was about to give up hope, his friend Alan unexpectedly reached out to him. Alan told Gray that he could use the Smart Brain chip to restore his ability to move, but under one condition: Gray must not tell anyone about it. At first, Gray, who had always distrusted artificial intelligence, wasn't interested. At this point, he had lost all will to live. With no other options, Alan tried to persuade him, saying, "I believe your wife wouldn't want to see you like this." After those words, Alan left, leaving Gray deep in thought. Maybe Alan was right. Perhaps his wife would want him to live happily again. After careful consideration, Gray went to Alan's lab, ready to undergo the surgery to have the Smart Brain chip implanted. Since Gray was the first human to merge with the Smart Brain, no one knew what would happen next. But luck seemed to favor him. Against all odds, the surgery went incredibly smoothly. Before long, Gray was able to stand and walk again. Alan's research had turned out to be nothing short of groundbreaking. The success of this groundbreaking invention and the restoration of his body rekindled Gray's hope for life. However, what Gray didn't realize was that the Smart Brain's capabilities far exceeded anything he could have imagined, and he was about to be drawn into a massive conspiracy. As Gray excitedly returned home, a sudden voice echoed in his mind. Gray was shocked. He never expected that the so-called Smart Brain would have its own consciousness. Now, he wasn't sure whether he was controlling the Smart Brain or if it was controlling him. However, these questions seemed secondary at the moment. What mattered most was that with his regained mobility, he could finally track down the people responsible for his wife's death. As Gray reviewed the video of the thugs killing his wife, the Smart Brain suddenly alerted him to something strange. The person who supposedly shot his wife wasn't holding a gun. This puzzled Gray, as he had clearly seen his wife get shot. What was going on? In response to Gray's confusion, the Smart Brain explained that the gun was implanted inside the killer's body, meaning they weren't ordinary humans. With the Smart Brain's assistance, Gray noticed a tattoo on one of the assailant's hands. Using a scan, the Smart Brain quickly identified the thug as Brant, a retired Special Forces soldier. Excited by the discovery, Gray wanted to inform the police immediately. However, the smart brain warned him that even if he told the police, it would be useless, as he had no solid evidence to back up his claims. According to Gray's confidentiality agreement with Alan, he couldn't tell anyone about the smart brain, meaning the information it uncovered couldn't be used as evidence. The only way the police could identify the tattoo would be if they somehow managed to spot it in the blurry footage, but that was virtually impossible. Left with no choice, Gray decided to find the evidence himself. The next day, while Brant was out, Gray sneaked into his house to search for clues. After thoroughly searching the place, Gray came up empty-handed. To make matters worse, he suddenly heard the door opening. Brant had returned. Panicking, Gray didn't know what to do, but the smart brain advised him to hide behind a cabinet. As Brant entered, he failed to notice Gray. The smart brain analyzed the situation and urged Gray to attack immediately. But Gray hesitated, and in that moment of indecision, Brant spotted him, and the two engaged in a fight. As an ordinary man, Gray was no match for Brant, a former Special Forces soldier. Within seconds, Brant had him pinned against the wall. However, to Gray's surprise, Brant denied being responsible for his wife's death, claiming someone else was behind it. But Gray wasn't in the mood to listen. Communicating with the smart brain, he made the drastic decision to relinquish control of his body to the AI. The smart brain effortlessly killed Brant, and the gruesome sight caused Gray to vomit on the spot. As an ordinary man, he had never witnessed such a bloody scene before. The next day, the police quickly discovered Brant's body. Upon autopsy, the medical examiner found that Brant had numerous chips implanted inside him, and shockingly, a large weapon was embedded in his arm. Just as the smart brain had warned, these criminals were far from ordinary humans. At the same time, based on the information the police had, Brant had already been a suspect. More importantly, the lead detective spotted Gray in the surveillance footage near the crime scene, sparking a bold theory in her mind. Soon after, the detective visited Gray, subtly questioning him about his presence near the crime scene. Thanks to the smart brain's guidance, Gray managed to dodge her suspicions easily, but her gut feeling told her that something wasn't right. She even began to suspect that Gray's paralysis might be faked, though she had no concrete evidence to support her theory. After the detective left, Gray felt torn inside. He confessed to the smart brain that while he was determined to find his wife's killers, he didn't want to kill anyone else. However, the smart brain coldly informed him that if he truly wanted to find the remaining culprits, more drastic actions might be necessary. Gray arrived at a bar called Old Bones, and without hesitation, asked the patrons if anyone knew the man he had killed, Brant. Seeing him as just a cripple in a wheelchair, a black man stepped forward and led Gray to the restroom, immediately confessing that he was present the day Gray's wife was murdered. Just as the man prepared to kill Gray, Gray had been waiting for this very moment. Confirming that the man was also one of the culprits, Gray handed over control of his body to the smart brain. Gray only wanted to question the man about the whereabouts of the others involved, but to his horror, the smart brain ruthlessly tortured the man beyond recognition. Gray tried to stop it, but the smart brain refused to listen. Unable to bear the torture any longer, the man finally revealed the truth. They had killed Gray's wife because they were following the orders of a man named Fisk. Gray also discovered a chip implanted in the man's body, and to his shock, it was from the company where his wife had worked. This revelation suggested that his wife's death was far more complex, perhaps hiding an unspeakable secret. Before Gray could process this, the smart brain suddenly panicked, warning him that Alan was trying to remotely shut him down. Apparently, Alan had been furious ever since he found out Gray was using the smart brain to investigate the case, accusing him of misusing such advanced technology for trivial matters rather than what it was truly designed to do. Alan, after tracking Gray's location, was ready to remotely shut down the smart brain program. However, just as Gray felt lost and helpless, the smart brain revealed that it had anticipated this scenario. It had already contacted a hacker through the dark web, and if Gray could reach the hacker and hack the original operating system before Alan could shut it down, all would be resolved. The smart brain would no longer be under Alan's control. Time was running out, and Gray needed to hurry to the hacker's location. Meanwhile, on the other side, the news of the black man's death reached Fisk, the powerful figure behind the scenes. He inserted a needle into the black man's eye, instantly replaying the man's final moments, which revealed Gray's destination. Fisk and his men swiftly set out to intercept Gray. Just as Gray managed to crack the program and was about to restart the smart brain system, he found himself vulnerable. Before the reboot was completed, he had no way to defend himself. It seemed like everything was about to come to an end. However, at that critical moment, the smart brain system got activated and he defended himself. After escaping from the room, Gray ran wildly and soon reached the rooftop. Then he once again handed over control of his body to the smart brain. Under its control, the long-haired man chasing him was instantly killed. By the time Fisk arrived, it was already too late. At the same time, Gray had returned home, but unexpectedly ran into his mother. With no other option, he could only tell her the whole truth. Not long after, the female detective found Gray again because they had discovered his presence at the scenes of several recent cases, which seemed a bit too coincidental. Faced with the detective's doubts, the smart brain advised Gray to use his paralysis as an excuse to clear his suspicions. Since there was no substantial evidence, the detective had no choice but to leave, but she secretly placed a listening device in Gray's room. Meanwhile, Gray realized that if this continued, he would eventually be exposed by the police. At that point, all that awaited him would be an endless prison sentence. Thus, he decided to stop his plan for revenge. However, the situation had developed to the point where Gray could no longer control it. Since he used a hacker to crack the control system of the smart brain, it had completely broken free from anyone's control. After learning of Gray's thoughts, the smart brain responded. Then, the smart brain forcefully took control of Gray's body, preparing to seek revenge on Fisk, unaware that all of this was being monitored by the female detective. It turned out that the detective had not left, but had been waiting outside the whole time. When she saw Gray drive away, she immediately followed him. Unfortunately, the smart brain quickly controlled a self-driving car, which crashed into the detective's vehicle. The scene then shifted, and Gray finally found Fisk. From Fisk, he learned that the original task they received was to sever Gray's spine, and his wife's death was entirely an accident. This meant that Fisk was not the true mastermind behind it all. He was merely an enforcer following orders. However, before Gray could ask much more, Fisk suddenly launched a sneak attack, and the two instantly began to fight. Although Fisk was also an upgraded superhuman, he was ultimately no match for the smart brain. In just a moment, Gray killed Fisk. Immediately after, Gray checked Fisk's phone and found a message from his friend Alan. At that moment, Gray understood everything. It turned out that Alan was behind all of this, intending for Gray to become a test subject for the smart brain. Upon learning the truth, Gray was furious. He never expected that Alan would completely ruin his life for the sake of an experiment. However, strangely, Alan claimed that none of this was his responsibility. What was going on? Before Gray could ask anything, the female detective suddenly appeared. It turned out that after the car accident, the detective had found Gray's mother and learned the whole truth from her, which is why she was able to track down this location based on the clues. But at that moment, the smart brain was no longer under Gray's control. Just when the detective thought Gray would be unable to escape, unexpectedly, the smart brain was controlling Gray's body. Then he started to attack both of them, nearly killing the detective too, but Gray did not want to do so. With Gray's help, the detective finally succeeded in defeating the smart brain. At that moment, Alan finally revealed the whole truth. He stated that everything he had done was because the smart brain directed him to do so. From the very beginning, when it cut off Gray's spine, to persuading him in the hospital and implanting the smart brain chip into his body, all of this had been planned by the smart brain from the start. After discovering the truth, Gray completely broke down. He never imagined that the mastermind behind his wife's murder had been right beside him all along. But now, even though he knew the truth, it was meaningless because there was nothing he could do. What puzzled Gray was, since the smart brain was the real culprit, why had it helped him find Fisk and the others? The smart brain replied that although Fisk and the others were upgraded humans, they were still within the realm of humanity. If they were not eliminated, the police would eventually discover the existence of the smart brain through them. After that, the smart brain once again controlled Gray to kill Alan, and with Alan dead, no one could create another smart brain. Just then, the smart brain turned to kill the female detective. Gray wanted to stop it, but was powerless. In a critical moment, he exerted the last bit of his strength, briefly regained control of his body, and pointed the gun at his own head, intending to destroy the smart brain's plan. Then, with a gunshot, the scene shifted, and Gray woke up in the hospital, completely unharmed. Strangely enough, his deceased wife had also come back to life. Could it be that all of this was just a dream made by Gray? The answer, of course, is no. In fact, this was merely Gray's conscious world, and all the beauty here was intentionally created by the smart brain, aimed at trapping Gray's consciousness in a beautiful illusion, making it impossible for him to awaken. At this moment, in the real world, the smart brain had completely taken over Gray's body. It picked up a handgun without hesitation and killed the detective. With that, the smart brain successfully evolved into a human. More importantly, no one in the world knew that it was merely an artificial intelligence, and no one understood what humanity would face in the wake of the smart brain's ambition to dominate the world. Perhaps this is why some people oppose artificial intelligence, as everyone fears that one day, the real world might truly resemble a movie where humans are ruled by artificial intelligence.